I never thought a single slip of paper could rewrite history. But then again, I never thought my own flesh and blood would sell me out for a fantasy. My daughter, Diane, hadn't dialed my number in 12 years. Not when I retired, not when I had hip surgery, and certainly not just to say hello. Yet the moment a rumor started circulating that I had won $4 million in the state lottery, she was standing on my doorstep in the pouring Seattle rain, shivering like a lost puppy. I opened the door, and there she was. Her eyes were red, her clothes were soaked, and she looked at me with a desperation I hadn't seen since she was a teenager asking for car keys. Behind her, lurking near the driveway, was her husband, Gavin, and my grandson, Toby. A boy I wouldn't have recognized if I passed him on the street. It was a tableau of family, or at least a very expensive imitation of one. Before I tell you how I dismantled their scheme piece by piece, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that truth is worth more than gold, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep uncovering these stories together. And in the comments, tell me what city you are watching from and what time it is there. I want to know who is standing witness with me today. Because what happened next wasn't just a reunion. It was a robbery in slow motion. The rain in Seattle has a way of washing the color out of everything, turning the world into shades of slate and charcoal. It was fitting weather for the ghosts that were currently shaking off their umbrellas in my foyer. I stood back, leaning on my cane more out of habit than necessity, and watched them invade my sanctuary. Gavin looked around the entryway with the eyes of a building inspector, calculating square footage and market value. Toby, who must have been 15 by now, didn't even look at me. He was hypnotized by the glowing rectangle in his hand, thumbs flying across the screen, oblivious to the grandfather he hadn't seen since he was in diapers. Diane was the only one playing the part. She reached out, her hands trembling, and touched my arm. The fabric of my sweater was dry. Her fingers were cold and damp. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking in a way that sounded almost theatrical. "I can't believe I'm here. It's been too long." She moved to hug me, and I let her. I didn't return the embrace, but I didn't push her away either. I just stood there, a statue in my own home, wondering why the script felt so poorly written. 12 years of silence doesn't end on a whim. It ends with a motive. We moved into the living room. I offered them tea because that is what civilized people do, even when they suspect barbarians are at the gate. Diane sat on the edge of the floral armchair that used to be her mother's favorite. She began to speak, and outspilled a torrent of apologies that felt as rehearsed as a political stump speech. She talked about how young she had been, how foolish, how she had blamed me for things that were beyond my control. She brought up the divorce, of course, when my wife, her mother, walked out all those years ago. Diane had taken her side instantly. I was the boring structural engineer, the man obsessed with foundations and load-bearing walls, while her mother was the free spirit who needed space. I had been the villain of her narrative for over a decade. Now suddenly, she claimed to see the light. "I realized I was punishing you for Mom's choices," Diane said, wiping away a tear that tracked through her makeup. "We want to start over, Dad. We want to be a family again." Gavin nodded solemnly from the sofa, though his eyes kept drifting toward the hallway where my home office was located. He wasn't listening to her apology. He was listening for the sound of opportunity. The visit lasted exactly 45 minutes. After the tea was drunk and the hollow platitudes were exchanged, they stood up to leave. "We don't want to overwhelm you," Diane said, squeezing my hand with a grip that felt more like a shackle than a caress. But can we come back? Maybe tomorrow? We have so much catch-up to do. I agreed, mostly because I needed them out of my house so I could think. I watched from the front window as they walked to their car. It was a luxury SUV, black and sleek. Not the kind of vehicle belonging to a struggling family who had just poured their hearts out about hard times. As they climbed in, I saw Gavin say something to Diane. She didn't look sad anymore. She looked intense, focused. As they pulled away, disappearing into the gray drizzle, a cold feeling settled in my gut. It wasn't the weather. It was the instinct I had honed over 40 years of engineering. I knew when a structure was sound, and I knew when the foundation was rotten. This reunion was built on quicksand. They wanted something, and I was fairly certain I knew what it was. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the neighborhood smelling of wet pine and asphalt. I was out sweeping the front walk when Henry, my neighbor from 2 doors down, wandered over. Henry was a retired beat cop, the kind of guy who noticed everything, but said very little unless it mattered. He leaned on his rake, chewing on a toothpick. "Saw you had company yesterday," Henry said, nodding toward my driveway. "Family?" I nodded. "My daughter and her crew. First time in 12 years. Henry squinted. "That explains it. I saw that same black SUV parked down the street 3 days ago, just sitting there. Then, a couple of hours later, I saw a guy matching your son-in-law's description walking up your driveway. He didn't knock, just walked around the side, looked in the windows, checked the backyard gate." My grip tightened on the broom handle. They hadn't just dropped by. They had cased the joint. It was surveillance. If you have ever felt the sharp sting of betrayal from the people who are supposed to protect you, if you know what it's like to realize you are just a resource to be harvested, then you understand why this story matters. Please, subscribe to the channel right now. Do it for the truth, and do it so you never have to face this kind of darkness alone. I went back inside and went straight to my desk. I am a man of lists and diagrams. If I was going to figure this out, I needed to see the data. I pulled out a legal pad and wrote "timeline" at the top. I started working backward. Yesterday was the visit. 3 days ago was the surveillance Henry had spotted. But what triggered it? Why now? I remembered a phone call from 2 weeks prior. It was a wrong number, or so I thought. A woman asking for Walter and then giggling, asking if I was the lucky Walter. I had hung up, assuming it was a telemarketer or a prank. Now I wasn't so sure. I wrote that down. Then I thought about the mail. I had received a strange flyer for a high-end investment firm addressed to me personally, not current resident. The dots were starting to appear, but the picture they formed was blurry. They believed I had money, significant money, but I hadn't won anything. My pension was comfortable, my investments were steady, but I certainly wasn't a millionaire. Where did this $4 million figure come from? I needed to find the source of the infection before I could cure it. Memory is a funny thing. It archives details you don't realize are important until later. I sat there staring at my notes when a specific interaction at the bank flashed into my mind. Last month, I was at the downtown branch to renew a certificate of deposit. The branch manager, a sharp woman named Mrs. Gable, had asked me a peculiar question. "Mr. Higgins, did you authorize a credit check from a car dealership in Portland?" I had told her absolutely not. She had flagged it and blocked the request. At the time, she mentioned the person requesting it had provided my social security number and mother's maiden name. I assumed it was identity theft from a data breach. Now, the realization hit me like a physical blow. Diane lived in Portland. She knew my social. She knew her grandmother's maiden name. It hadn't been a stranger hacking a database. It was my own daughter trying to see if I could finance a loan. They had been probing my financial perimeter for weeks before they ever stepped foot on my porch. The phone rang at noon. It was Diane. Her voice was chirpy, completely different from the somber tone she had used yesterday. "Dad, we were thinking of picking up some lunch and coming over. Gavin found this great Italian place. We really want to talk about the future." "The future," I repeated, keeping my voice level. "That sounds heavy." She laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. "No, just family stuff. We'll be there in an hour." I hung up and stared at the phone. They were accelerating the timeline. They must be desperate. I decided to play along. I needed them to say it. I needed to know exactly what lie they were operating under, so I could trap them in it. I went to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee. If they wanted a show, I would give them a performance. I was the confused, lonely old man, ripe for the picking, or so they thought. They arrived with lasagna and garlic bread, filling my kitchen with smells that used to remind me of Sunday dinners. Now, they just smelled like bribery. We ate in the dining room. Gavin was sweating, wiping his forehead with a napkin every few minutes. He started complaining about the economy, about inflation, about how hard it was for honest entrepreneurs to get a break. "It's just tough, Walter," he said, using my first name instead of Dad or Sir. "We've had some bad luck. Business deals that went south because partners backed out. We're looking at, well, we might lose our house." Diane reached over and took my hand. "We were thinking, Dad, this house is so big for just you. And with your recent good fortune, maybe we could help each other." "My recent good fortune?" I asked, pausing with my fork halfway to my mouth. They froze. They exchanged a glance. "Well," Gavin stammered, "we heard, the lottery." There it was. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I didn't confirm or deny it. I just smiled a vague, senile smile and said, "I have been very blessed lately." Their relief was palpable. They practically deflated in their chairs. They thought they had me. They thought I was admitting to the windfall. After they left, promising to return the next day to discuss details, I went straight to the phone book. I needed a professional. I couldn't rely on neighborly gossip and my own deductions. I found a private investigator named Miles who specialized in financial fraud and asset recovery. I called him and explained the situation. "I need to know everything about my son-in-law's debts," I told him, "and I need to know where this rumor started." Miles was expensive, but I suspected he would be worth every penny. He promised a preliminary report within 24 hours. I sat in my silent house, the smell of garlic still lingering, and felt a cold rage burning in my chest. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here to harvest me. Miles worked fast. He was at my door the next afternoon with a thick manila envelope. We sat at the kitchen table, and he laid out the autopsy of my family's integrity. "Your son-in-law, Gavin, is in deep," Miles said, pointing to a stack of papers. "Gambling debts, mostly. He owes about $80,000 to some very impatient loan sharks in Portland. Plus, he leveraged their house to buy into a crypto scam." "And the lottery?" I asked. Miles chuckled grimly. "That's the best part. A guy named Walter Higgins, same last name, different guy, won $50,000 on a scratch-off in a town 20 miles over. He bought it at a gas station where Gavin's cousin works. The cousin told Gavin, but by the time the story traveled, 50,000 became 4 million, and the other Walter became you. It was a comedy of errors. A case of mistaken identity fueled by greed and wishful thinking. They wanted it to be true so badly that they didn't bother to verify it. They just showed up with their hands out, ready to collect on a fortune that didn't exist. I read through the debt report. Gavin wasn't just broke, he was drowning. He had maxed out credit cards in Diane's name. He had borrowed from friends he never paid back. The man was a financial black hole. And Diane? She knew. The report showed she had been trying to get payday loans to cover the interest. They were terrified. I could almost feel sorry for them if they had come to me and told the truth. If they had said, "Dad, we messed up, we're in trouble, please help." I would have helped. I had savings. I could have paid off the sharks, maybe helped them restructure. But they didn't do that. Instead, they concocted a plan to manipulate me. They investigated me, spied on me, and tried to gaslight me into handing over millions they thought I was hoarding. That deceit broke the last tether of affection I had for them. They didn't want a father. They wanted an ATM. I formulated a plan. It was cruel, perhaps, but necessary. I needed to show them the mirror. I needed to expose their greed in a way they couldn't deny later. I called my lawyer, Camille. She was a sharp-witted woman who had handled my estate planning. "Camille," I said, "I need you to draw up some papers, and I need you to be present at my house on Friday." "What's going on, Walter?" she asked. "I'm hosting a reveal party," I said, "and I need a witness." Then I called a notary I knew and asked him to come as well. I wanted everything documented. This wasn't going to be a family squabble. It was going to be a legal proceeding. When Diane called later that day, pushing to meet again, I told her to bring everyone on Friday. "I have something important to show you," I said, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's in the safe. It will solve all your problems." She practically squealed with delight. The preparation was meticulous. I went to a novelty shop downtown and bought a realistic-looking fake lottery ticket. I filled it out with the winning numbers from the date of the rumor. I placed it in an envelope inside my heavy steel floor safe. Along with it, I placed a binder containing the investigation report from Miles and the statements from the bank. I spent the day rehearsing. I needed to sell the moment. I practiced my breathing, practiced the stumble. I am an engineer. I understand mechanics. The mechanics of a fall. The mechanics of a heart attack. It had to look real enough to trigger their adrenaline, real enough to make them choose. That night, I sat in my armchair and looked at the empty room. This was the last night I would have to wonder about their intentions. Tomorrow, the truth would be out. It was a lonely feeling, knowing you are about to orphan yourself voluntarily. But the alternative was living a lie. Friday arrived with a slate-gray sky, threatening another downpour. Camille and the notary arrived early. I hid them in the adjacent study, behind the French doors with the sheer curtains. They had a clear view of the living room and the safe, but they wouldn't be seen immediately. "Are you sure about this?" Camille asked, looking concerned. "If they panic—" "They won't panic," I said. "Or rather, they won't panic about me. You'll see." At noon, the doorbell rang. They were punctual. Gavin was wearing a suit, which looked ridiculous on him. Diane was wearing a dress. Even Toby had combed his hair. They looked like they were attending a graduation or a funeral. I let them in, smiling the benevolent patriarch smile. Come in. Today is a big day." I led them into the living room. The air was thick with tension. Gavin's leg was bouncing up and down. Diane kept licking her lips. "So, Dad," she started, "you said you had something to show us?" "Yes," I said. "I've been thinking about what you said. About family, helping family. About legacy." I walked over to the large painting on the wall and swung it aside to reveal the wall safe. A gasp went through the room. It was like oxygen to a fire. "I have 4 million reasons to be grateful," I said, spinning the dial. "And I think it's time I shared that burden." Click, click, click. The sound of the tumblers was the only noise in the house. I could hear their breathing. I grabbed the handle. "It's all in here," I said. I pulled the heavy door open. As I did, I let out a sharp, guttural gasp. I clutched my chest with my left hand, grimacing in pain. I staggered backward, knocking over a small side table. "My chest," I wheezed. I can't." I collapsed onto the carpet, landing on my side, curling up. I peered through slit eyes. It was the moment of truth. A normal daughter would scream. A normal son-in-law would rush to check a pulse. A normal grandson would call 911. Instead, Gavin lunged. He didn't lunge for me. He lunged past my prone body, practically stepping over my legs, and dove for the open safe. "Get the bag," he yelled. Diane stood frozen for a second, looking at me, then looked at Gavin, pulling the envelope out. She turned toward him. "Is it there? Is the ticket there?" Toby whipped out his phone and started recording, aiming the camera at the open safe, ignoring his grandfather dying on the rug. "I got it!" Gavin shouted, ripping open the envelope. He pulled out the fake ticket. "It's here! 4 million! We're saved!" Diane rushed to him, grabbing his arm. "Let me see. Oh my God, Gavin, look at the numbers." They were celebrating. I was lying 3 feet away, ostensibly dead. And they were celebrating. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was absolute. I had my answer. I sat up. I stopped wheezing. I brushed a piece of lint off my sweater. "Put it down, Gavin," I said, my voice clear and cold as ice. The room went silent. Gavin spun around, the ticket crumpled in his fist. Diane looked at me, eyes wide with confusion. "Dad? You're okay?" "I'm perfectly fine," I said, standing up. "You can come out now, Camille." The French doors opened. Camille walked out, followed by the notary. Both of them looked disgusted. Gavin looked like he was going to vomit. "What is this?" he stammered. You faked it?" "I tested you," I said, "and you failed. You stepped over my dying body to rob a safe." Camille stepped forward. "I have witnessed the events. I also have the video recording from the security camera in the bookshelf." She pointed to a tiny lens they hadn't noticed. "That ticket is a fake," I told them. "Just like the rumor you heard. Just like your concern for me. I didn't win $4 million. But thanks to Miles, my investigator, I know exactly how much you lost." I tossed the binder on the table. "I know about the loan sharks. I know about the credit checks. I know everything." The color drained from Diane's face. She looked from the binder to me, realizing the game wasn't just up. The board had been flipped. "Dad, please," she started, the tears coming again. But this time they were tears of terror. "We were desperate. We were going to help you." "Get out," I said. "Camille has a restraining order ready to be filed if you ever contact me again. I am not your father anymore. I am not your bailout. I am a stranger." They left in silence. No protests, no arguments, just the shuffling shame of people who have been stripped naked in the light of truth. After they were gone, I sat in the quiet house. I was alone, truly alone. But as I listened to the rain start up again against the window, I didn't feel lonely. I felt clean. The rot was gone. I had cut it out. We all want to believe that love is unconditional, that blood is thicker than water. But sometimes, blood is just a stain you have to scrub out. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to save your own soul, you know why I did this. Please, subscribe to the channel. Join us. Because facing the truth is the hardest thing a human can do, and we shouldn't have to do it alone. Goodbye and good luck.